Welcome, everybody. I'm Paul Brest, an emeritus professor at the law school, and I co-teach this class with Deborah Satz, who's a philosophy professor and dean of the School of Humanities and Sciences. Dean Satz is unable to come today, and in her absence, I'll say a few introductory words with a reminder about the motivation for the course. So what's the course about? Deep disagreement pervades our democracy, from arguments over COVID policies to trans rights to voting systems and internet regulation. Such disagreement by itself is not a cause of concern. We should expect in a democratic society, one that is not ruled by a king or autocrat, that is a society based on the equal freedom and status of its members, we should expect that reasonable people will disagree about many things. Some of the deepest questions of morality, religion, and value are hard to think through. Even people who are well motivated and conscientious will answer questions pertaining to some of these matters in different ways, perhaps because of their different life experiences, perhaps because the facts are hard to pin down and admit of various interpretations, or because they'll make different trade-offs among competing values. Disagreement is a feature of a democratic society, not a bug. But not all disagreement is productive. Sometimes people fail to consider inconvenient facts and close their minds to evidence and reasoning that doesn't support their views. Sometimes, and all too frequently in online platforms, a culture of incivility prevails with respect to those with whom we disagree. Note that by incivility, we're not talking about politeness, rather about the failure to treat other people with respect simply because they hold different views on matters that we care about. The closing of the mind is especially a concern for a university. The fundamental mission of the university, the pursuit of knowledge, absolutely depends on the free exchange of ideas and an openness to questioning received opinions. History shows how often we get things wrong even when we're trying to figure out the truth. And it's because we feel this mission, the pursuit of knowledge, is under stress from forces both outside the university and inside, that Deborah and I decided last year, 2 years ago now, to launch this class. We believe that when minds are closed, that's not good for democracy, and universities have an important role to play in producing responsible citizens. But feel free to disagree with that. As we note on the syllabus, the course is offered in the spirit of the observation by Hannah Holborn Gray, the former president of the University of Chicago, that education should not be intended to make people comfortable, it's meant to make them think. Each week features scholars who disagree, sometimes quite strongly, about major policy issues, but each is committed to following the evidence and to try to present reasons that others can understand and acknowledge. Each class is focused on a different topic, and we have guest speakers presenting for about 10 minutes each, and then join us for a conversation. After the first hour or so, the floor will then be open to questions or comments from you all. And we'll also survey the audience at the beginning and at the end of each class to see whether the arguments moved minds. That said, even when minds are not moved, we hope the class gives you an appreciation for the reasoning behind the views you reject. Productive disagreement is hard. In addition to having an open mind and being able to listen to others, it requires knowledge of the facts and values at stake in an issue, and we hope that this course helps you engage. As I mentioned, this is our third year teaching the class. With one exception, the classes have proceeded without disruption. The exception involves protesters not connected with Stanford, protesting a speaker for alleged conduct unconnected with Stanford. The purpose of the class, after all, is to model critical and civil disagreement by our guests and then invite tough questions from the students. If anyone feels the need to protest the speaker, or for that matter, the moderator, you're welcome to do that in a public area such as White Plaza. And now, let me introduce our speakers and our moderator. There are few individuals in the world who've devoted more time and energy to achieving the goals of peace in the Middle East than Dennis Ross, who worked under Republican and Democratic presidents since Jimmy Carter toward that peace. Even though he's not formally served as an ambassador, Dr. Ross is often given that title in recognition of the many diplomatic roles that he's held. One indication of his impartiality is that he's been criticized by people on both sides of the conflict. His books include The Missing Piece, notice the pun, Missing Piece, The Inside Story of the Fight for Middle Eastern Peace, Doomed to Succeed, The U.S.-Israel Relationship from Truman to Obama, and most recently, Statecraft 2.0, What America Needs to Learn in a Multipolar World, which I hope members of our administration are reading. Dr. Ross is currently a fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and the Jewish People Policy Institute. Ambassador Ross was raised in the Bay Area by a Jewish mother and Catholic stepfather and received his PhD from UCLA. Shibley Telhami was born to an Arab family in Israel and later immigrated to the United States, and he received a PhD in political science from Cal. Dr. Telhami is a political scientist and leading expert on U.S. policy in the Middle East, the Anwar Sadat Professor of Peace and Development at the University of Maryland, and a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution. He's an expert in U.S. foreign policy, Middle Eastern politics, and especially the role of public opinion in Arab countries, Israel, and the United States. He has advised the U.S. mission to the United Nations, the Department of State, members of Congress, and has written numerous books, including The Stakes, America in the Middle East, The World Through Arab Eyes, Arab Public Opinion, and Reshaping the Middle East and the Peace Puzzle. Peace seems to be a theme of their work, not surprisingly, given what we're doing this afternoon. The Peace Puzzle, America's Quest for Arab-Israeli Peace. We're grateful to Larry Diamond for moderating the conversation between Dr. Ross and Dr. Telhami. Dr. Diamond is a political sociologist and scholar of democratic studies. He did not attend the University of California, but rather has his degrees from Stanford. He's a senior fellow both at the Hoover Institution and the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies, FSI, where he served as director of the Center for Democracy Development and the Rule of Law. He co-chairs Hoover's project on Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific Region Project. At FSI, he founded the program on Arab Reform and Development and the Israel Studies program. We are extremely fortunate to have all three of you here this afternoon. Dr. Telhami will begin by taking about 10 minutes, and then Dr. Ross will follow, after which Dr. Diamond will moderate a conversation, and then we will open the floor to you all. But before we begin, please answer the polling question that we have up on the screen. Is a two-state solution still realistically possible for Israel-Palestine? And Kaisa has asked me to be sure to write down the answer since I got it wrong last time. So, yes, within the next decade, 20, yes, but more time, 50, and then 20. Okay. 20, 55, 25. And let me ask Dr. Telhami to come up.
Good afternoon. Well, thanks for inviting me. Thank you, Paul, for organizing this. Pleasure to meet you for the first time. It's a pleasure to see you, Larry. Larry and I have known each other for years. I've always admired Larry's work. And Dennis and I have known each other literally for decades, not just years, having worked occasionally together related to government issues. Not only did we both go to the UC system in California, but we actually both had stints in early career in the Bay Area, both of us. And not only, Dennis, you may not know this, but in fact, the first course I ever taught in political science at Berkeley was not about the Middle East or even American foreign policy. It was about Soviet foreign policy. And that's what you were doing in the Bay Area at that time. So we even have some roots in issues that are not related to the Middle East here in the Bay Area. Let me start by saying that I advocated for two states in Israel-Palestine long before this became a policy objective. I participated in and led Track 2 efforts to bring Israelis and Palestinians together behind the scenes before and leading up to the Oslo Accords, after which I remained an advocate, even while recognizing the flaws of the agreements and the obstacles along the way. If a real offer of two sovereign states living in peace with each other were to be put on the table realistically now, I would advise Israelis and Palestinians to grab it. And I would advise everybody else to cheer them on. But that's not where we are today. The real choice Israelis and Palestinians face today is not between two states and one state. It's between permanent apartheid and/or ethnic cleansing on the one hand, and some equitable outcome on the other, whether it's one state with full equality, two states, or confederation. Pretending otherwise distracts from the horrific immediate reality that is still unfolding before our eyes, providing a smokescreen for more horror ahead. Let's just review what has transpired over the past 2 years. Early in 2023, many of us warned in writing of increasingly dangerous hopelessness in the West Bank and Gaza after more than half a century of occupation with no end in sight. Increasingly, human rights organizations, as well as scholars, including me, saw the reality in Israel-Palestine as a one-state reality that is apartheid or akin to apartheid. The rise of a far-right Israeli government that opposes relinquishing control of the occupied territories, with some known to advocate for ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, was a recipe for an explosion like we had never seen before. In fact, in March 2023, I wrote with colleagues in Foreign Affairs, quote, "Palestine is not a state in waiting, and Israel is not a democratic state incidentally occupying Palestinian territory. All the territory west of the Jordan River has long constituted a single state under Israeli rule, where the land and the people are subject to radically different legal regimes, and Palestinians are permanently treated as a lower caste. One state controls the entry and exit of people and goods, oversees security, and has the capacity to impose its decisions, laws, and policies on millions of people without their consent," unquote. In April of 2023, I worried that Biden's actions on Israel-Palestine, shielding Israeli settlements in the UN, not fulfilling his pledges during the campaign to reverse Trump's steps, and prioritizing normalization of Israeli-Arab relations over the pressing Palestinian-Israeli peace needs, could stoke more violence instead of limiting it. In fact, I wrote, quote, "The inevitable outcome is that on the Palestinian side, those advocating nonviolence will lose ground as despair increases, and those advocating military resistance will gain ground. On the Israeli side, the empowerment of the militant far right and its ascendance into positions of power promises more violence, which they appear to seek in pursuit of the, quote, the lost war." I warned that, quote, the coming collapse into violence will be like nothing we have seen before. The clock is ticking, unquote. That was in April 2023. Then came Hamas's horrific attack that killed nearly 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, including about 35 children, and took 250 hostages in what much of the world saw as war crimes, with Hamas leaders sought by the International Criminal Court for their deeds. Israel then launched an assault in Gaza that has obliterated the Strip, killing over 70,000 people, likely much more, mostly civilians, including over 20,000 children, while destroying the infrastructure, including almost everything standing, while creating in the process 2 million refugees in what much of the world saw as genocide, including major human rights organizations, genocide scholars, half of all Americans, according to polls, and majorities of young Americans and Democrats. Arrest of Israeli leaders was also sought by the ICC for their actions. Even as the ceasefire mediated by the Trump administration took effect, the killing and destruction has not stopped, with several hundred Palestinians killed and dozens of remaining structures destroyed since the ceasefire took effect. International organizations continue to warn of a dire humanitarian crisis. And in the West Bank, settler violence against vulnerable Palestinian civilians, sometimes accompanied by Israeli troops, has escalated in a campaign dubbed by Senator Chris Van Hollen as, quote, slow ethnic cleansing, unquote. Israel now holds over 9,000 Palestinian prisoners, including over 1,200 held without charges, as well as about 350 children. This is the current reality, with Israeli ministers making clear that their vision for Israel is one of Jewish supremacy, that whatever words they employ, such as, quote, transfer or, quote, voluntary displacement, the objective is clearly ethnic cleansing. Certainly, it's neither one state with full equality nor two states that's on offer. Our intellectual and policy energies should thus go toward preventing further humanitarian disaster, toward protecting the rights of the helpless and vulnerable, and holding Israelis and Palestinians responsible for atrocities accountable, while building hope for a path toward any outcome that equally guards the rights of Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Arabs, whatever political form it takes. Personally, I have no preference other than assuring equality for all. The exact form is up to Israelis and Palestinians. That's why, before and after October 2023, I have focused my thoughts and writing less on lecturing Israelis and Palestinians and more on appealing to our own American government that has allowed itself to be part of the problem instead of being part of the solution over the decades. The U.S. is not a bystander. It has been an enabler of the awful reality in Israel-Palestine. Even before 2023, the entrenchment of the Israeli expansionist project, symbolized only partly by the Israeli settlement expansion in the West Bank, could not have taken place without extraordinary American support, military and economic, but especially in shielding Israel from the reach of international law and the UN and other arenas. Even worse, instead of allowing international organizations to hold the parties accountable for their severe and repeated violations, including war crimes, US administrations have instead taken actions against those organizations, such as the International Criminal Court, further eroding the global order. In the process, the sense of entitlement among the Israeli right has been bolstered, and with it, increasing Israeli public support for ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. In the emerging new world, the very sense of international law and order, which had served, at least theoretically, as a reference point for what is permissible, what is just, what is equitable, is now being challenged. This should be the starting point of conversation, honestly. It's far bigger than the question about the viability of a theoretical two-state solution. If we cannot even stop Israeli settler violence against vulnerable Palestinian civilians, let alone settlement expansion, how can we possibly be expected to do what it takes to bring about two states? If we are unable to do what's required to prevent the killing of 20,000 children before our own eyes, how can anyone trust an American promise of a future Palestinian state that might take more than a decade or two? For these reasons, my position has been that our policy should focus less on the specific political form that an equitable outcome in Israel-Palestine will take, whether that's two states or one state, and more on using the full force of American resources to take a firm position against any steps that are inequitable. We should focus less on a future we cannot fully control and more on the things that we can do and must do now to save lives, defend core values, and guard what's left of the international legal order. Thank you.
You hear me? Okay. First, I have to say, Shibley and I have known each other a long time. I think it's probably like 30 years that we've known each other. Some things we share, some things we don't. I will tell you one thing we do share. We are both very strong 49er fans. So at this point, we feel relatively good about that. Look, Shibley has outlined his view that we shouldn't focus on, my words now, paraphrasing, kind of the theoretical questions of one state or two state, but focus much more on the immediate human needs that need to be addressed. And while I think I understand that position, I actually do want to focus on the issue of the theoretical questions of one state or two states for a variety of reasons, but not the least of which is part of what Shibley is appealing to, I suspect, is not going to have a huge effect on the Trump administration. I think what is important is to understand how we think about this conflict and why one state, in fact, is not an answer. But let me start with a question that President Obama asked me. I worked for him for 3 years, and early on, he said to me, "Why is this conflict so hard to solve?" And I said, "Because you're reconciling two rights. This is not a right and a wrong. You have two national movements that are competing for the same space. The nature and depth of each side's identity is not only deep, but it's very much attached to the land. Neither side is going to disappear. Neither side is going to accept the idea that they have to give up their national identity. And it's the reason that ultimately, if you're going to get some kind of resolution, you need two states for two peoples." Now, I don't dispute the fact that there's a one-state reality right now. But I can tell you this about one state. If the aim is one state, it's a guarantee of a perpetual conflict. These two national identities, as I said, they're not going to disappear and they're not going to coexist in one state. First of all, the trauma that both Israelis and Palestinians are suffering from today makes them see the other in ways that makes it almost impossible for them to even contemplate the idea of living together. Secondly, you look at the region, every state that has more than one identity, national, tribal, clannish, go around the region. They're either failed states, failing states, or completely paralyzed. So if you want Israelis and Palestinians to look like Libya or Syria or Iraq or Yemen, then that's kind of the future if you're talking about one state. So the notion that this should be the focal point, it ignores what I think the reality is and is going to continue to be. So then I say, okay, 2 states for 2 peoples. I thought the poll was very interesting because there was a distinction between could it be a decade or would it be longer. The context today is terrible. Israelis look at Palestinians, and October 7th is what completely colors their view. And it's not just the killings and the seizure of hostages. You talk to Israelis today, and they'll refer to the videos that day, not only that Hamas, the Hamas onslaught, the people were filming themselves with a kind of glee, but in addition, when hostages were taken back into Gaza, you'll see large crowds cheering around the hostages who were being taken. That's the image that Israelis have. I just came back from 3 weeks there, and I had people say to me, you don't understand. The Palestinians want to kill us. Now, what do you think the Palestinian view of Israelis is? The Palestinian view of Israelis, given what's happened in Gaza, and also what's happening with regard to the lawlessness of settlers, the Palestinian view of Israelis is they don't see us as people. They are indifferent to us as people. The whole idea from a Palestinian standpoint is they're not prepared ever to accept us as equals or to accept independence. So here, I'm talking about the solution can't be one state, and it has to be 2 states for 2 peoples. We could not have a worse context to try to move from where we are to that, because there's not only a level of disbelief. I like to say disbelief is like losing faith. It's not the same as losing confidence. It's much more fundamental. And both sides, in a sense, have lost faith in the idea that they can live together. They haven't accepted the alternative reality, which is that neither one is going to disappear. You can't wish the other away. The challenge is going to be, how do you move from where we are to where we need to go? And it won't come soon, and it won't come easily, and it will take a determined effort, and it has to start with the ground up. I often say that even though when I was our negotiator in the 1990s, I always used to talk about the importance of people to people, that you had to create the stuff of peace, not just the formulas for peace, but the stuff of peace, the people-to-people relations. And the irony in the 1990s, there were extensive ties between peoples, but we didn't do enough of that. We focused way too much on the formulas for peace, which was necessary, but we didn't do enough from the ground up. We needed both a ground-up approach and we needed a top-down approach. We needed a vision for what the outcome would be, which was 2 states, but we needed to be able to build it from the ground up in a way that we did not, frankly, we just didn't spend enough time focused on that. So, as I look to the future, what do I think about? I think about how we try to take examples of cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians so both sides can see cooperation as possible. I think about talking about, over time, building a recognition of each other and doing something we didn't do in the 1990s. We never dealt with the question of legitimacy. The Israelis never looked at the Palestinians and said they're a people and they're entitled to self-determination. And Palestinians never looked at the Israelis and acknowledged there's a historic Jewish connection to the land. We focused on the fact of coexistence. We didn't focus on the need to get each side to move to a point where, in fact, they would accept the legitimacy of the other. We will have to engage in a process that increases the prospect of that. We will have to build a process that will focus on responsibilities and obligations on both sides. And there are obligations on both sides. If we're talking about a Palestinian state, you can't have a Palestinian state that has independent militias. If we're talking about a Palestinian state, you can't have a Palestinian state that basically allies with those who reject Israel's existence. If you're talking about a Palestinian state, it can't be a state that's built on the basis of corruption. If we're talking about a Palestinian state, it's a Palestinian state that has to be based on the premise of coexistence and not resistance. But what about the Israelis? If we're talking about reform on the Palestinian side, the Israelis have a responsibility to make it easier to reform, to build the authority of reformers, something they didn't do. When there was a very strong Palestinian reformer, Salam Fayyad, Israel didn't do things to help him succeed, to demonstrate that his way worked. They did the opposite. If we're talking about a Palestinian state, you can't have Israeli steps on the ground that make a Palestinian state impossible. If we're talking about building a sense of mutual respect and dignity, you can't have Israel, which Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israel is a state of laws. Well, you can't have lawlessness the way we've been seeing it in the West Bank. Both sides have to have a set of obligations. Both sides have to be prepared to assume responsibilities. Now, I'm not saying that they're equal today because Israel is an occupier. And I'm not saying they're equal today because we also have an Israeli government that seems to be defining its own rules. But there will be an election in Israel this year. And that election is likely to be maybe even earlier than we think. And elections do create the possibility for change. And if there is a possibility for change because the Israeli have an election in which a government no longer has people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir in it, who basically do seem to believe not just in Jewish supremacy, but in ethnic cleansing. If they're no longer a part of it, if they're no longer creating de facto annexation on the ground, then there is a potential for change. And there is a value in the Trump administration's 20-point plan. Point 19 talks about if the Palestinian Authority faithfully carries out reform, that can create a pathway to self-determination and statehood for the Palestinians, which is the aspiration of the Palestinian people. That point 19 is interesting to me because no American administration has ever publicly embraced the idea of self-determination for Palestinians. I will tell you, quite frankly, I would not have predicted that the first president to embrace that point would be Donald Trump. But it's there. And it creates what is a pathway if, in fact, we can see a transformation in Gaza, which will be the first step, if we see reform in the Palestinian Authority. That puts us in a position where Trump, who has a lot of leverage on Prime Minister Netanyahu, will he exercise it? If he does, I think it creates a possibility. Will we have a change in Israel? I think that creates much more of a possibility. Not because those who will emerge will suddenly embrace the idea of statehood. Because again, as I said, the consensus in Israel right now, a Palestinian state would be led by Hamas or groups like Hamas. But the ability to produce change, the ability to show the consequences of Israeli behaviors that have isolated the country, that creates for me a sense of opening and possibility. People often ask me, and I'll conclude with this. They say, are you an optimist? I say, I'm not an optimist. An optimist is someone who believes things will always work out. I don't believe that. But I am hopeful because I see possibility. If you're hopeful, you focus on the possibilities and how you translate the possibilities into new realities. We have a very tough reality that we're facing, but I'm not prepared to give up for the simple reason I don't see an alternative to two states for two peoples. It's not going to be achieved soon. It's going to take an effort that is different than what we've seen up until now. But if one state is a guarantee for a perpetual conflict, because the people on the left who embrace it think, we're going to be able to get Israelis and Palestinians to come together and sing Kumbaya, they live on a different planet. And the people on the right who think that Palestinians will accept an inferior status and not have the rights of citizens, they also live on a different planet. We live on this planet. We have an obligation to try to do what we can do. I'll stop there.
Thank you both so much. I think you both posed your arguments very powerfully and succinctly. So what I want to do is pose a few questions to each of you. I'm going to start with you, Dennis, and I'll ask one or two, and then I'll see if you want to come in. And you know I also have hard questions for you, Shibley. So first, Dennis, I'd like to talk about feasibility. And we've had, of course, what now? Well, more than 5 decades of Israeli settlement in the West Bank since the 1967 war. And as you note in your book, Statecraft, and as you note in everything you've been writing about this extremely vexing issue, it's not adequate to talk just about settlements. We have to distinguish between what settlements, where, and the physical pattern of them. And pragmatists, of which I think I can say you are a leading one, make a distinction between where people are living and how deeply the settlements intrude into the West Bank and what possibilities they leave behind for contiguous territory that could eventually constitute a state. And one of the things that's been happening, I think you'll concede, is that these settlements, which start out as illegal settlements and then wind up somehow becoming normalized, a growing number of them are intruding very deeply into the West Bank, and in their location and in their intrusiveness are making it is argued, more and more practically impossible to ever imagine a really kind of viable, recognizable state. And it is further alleged that this is deliberate, intentional policy on the part of Israel, particularly the politicians further to the right of Israel, to create facts on the ground that will simply be irreversible for all time. So my first question to you is there, can you conceive of, or are you willing to concede, there's some kind of tipping point where the settlements have become so intrusive, so seemingly permanently disruptive of the possibility to constitute any kind of semi-normal looking state that a two-state solution really is beyond imagination?
Yeah, look, first, it's a very fair question. Secondly, I did a book with a colleague of mine called Be Strong and of Good Courage. The whole purpose of the book was to get to the last chapter. It focused on Israeli prime ministers who were not afraid to make big decisions. And the whole purpose of the book was to get to the fact that Israel was in need of a courageous leader who would make a big decision, because this book was written in 2019. We were very close to a tipping point in the West Bank. Have we crossed it? Maybe from the standpoint of the kind of conception I always had of a Palestinian state and an Israeli state, maybe we have, because I don't think this is not, 8,000 settlers were pulled out of Gaza when Sharon withdrew in 2005. And that was a traumatic experience for a lot in Israel. We're talking now, you drew an interesting distinction, because I draw a distinction because it goes back to what we suggested at Camp David, that we would absorb 80% of the Israeli settlers in about 5 to 6% of the territory closest to the Green Line, and then outside that, you would have a Palestinian state, and the area that's absorbed, there'd be compensation to the Palestinians, territorial compensation and other compensation. So it was called settlement blocks and swaps. And the pattern of building has been quite deliberate to make it impossible to do that. So do I envision that the people who live outside the blocks today, probably 120,000, they're probably the most ideological, probably the most resistant, even though Palestinians, when we were at Camp David, they suggested the settlements could stay, but they would be under Palestinian sovereignty. And at that time, it was the Israelis who turned that down because they said it'll create too many complex problems. What happens if there's a security threat to the Israelis in settlement? Inevitably, it's going to create friction and contradictions. So they were against it. I have to say that I am more open to ideas about confederation than I've been before, because I think it's harder to move these populations.
Mixed settlement patterns.
Yes. Now, confederation, by definition, you're a state, okay? You're an independent state first. But then you have these confederal structures that combine the two in some respect. Is it a confederal arrangement between Israel, Palestine, and maybe Jordan? Maybe that is something I'm much more open to than I've ever been before. Because I do think the pattern on the ground, what we've seen is a deliberate effort to make it impossible to have a Palestinian state. That's why in 2019 I was writing about a tipping point. You're raising the issue of tipping point now. I can't dispute it because I believe we may have passed the point where you can talk about withdrawing all those Israelis who are outside the blocks. Look, in a perfect world, I would say those Israelis outside the blocks, let's say they're 120,000, they come back into Israel. That would be in a perfect world. I'm not sure we can produce that, but I do think there may be some alternatives where you create this pattern and where you're not moving populations and you create more of a confederal arrangement.
Okay, let me come to Shibley. When I first saw your article, and of course you spoke about it at CDDRL, I think soon after it came out, I thought, well, now you and your colleagues, I know all the other three of them, Mike Barnett, Nathan Brown, Mark Lynch, you're now arguing for a one-state solution. But the original article in 2023 was a little bit more nuanced in that regard. It was saying there is a one-state reality. It was more circumspect about what might follow. And your second article that we distributed from Foreign Affairs with Mark Lynch is even more nuanced in that regard and is sympathetic to the calls for a Palestinian state. So I'll pose two questions to you now. Have I got it right? And it sounds like you do favor as many kind of existing states as possible, endorsing the idea of a Palestinian state, which implies two states. And second of all, what do you think of what Dennis just proposed, that maybe we should think about as a third option or a kind of sub-option, some confederal form of a two-state solution in which there'd be less contiguity in where people are physically living than we normally imagine in state-to-state relationships?
First of all, you're absolutely right that at least in our foreign affairs articles, both of them, the argument was not favoring a one-state solution or a two-state solution. We didn't take a position on that. We only took a position that what now exists, and we have to come to grips with that. We have to come to grips who really controls the power, and the deep injustice in the inequality of power that now exists in that one-state reality. And once you reach the conclusion it's a one-state reality, it's inescapable that it's an apartheid one-state reality. Because the only thing that differentiates, once you agree that it's a one-state reality, it's impossible, at least not to envision the control of the West Bank. We could argue about the rest, but the control of the West Bank to be apartheid or apartheid-like. And so our position was not to advocate for one or the other. And to this day, I take that position. If in fact, in some ways, it's you could make an argument like Dennis does, that two states is probably preferable, or even more even if of all the equitable possibilities, one state with full equality, two states, or two states / confederation, that might be more doable. And for one thing, there's even more international support for it. That's the way international resolutions have been written up. That's the way even Arab League position is founded. That's the way even the position of the Palestinian Authority is. So it's easier to deal with it. But to me, that conversation right now, it's like we're in an alternate reality. I mean, if I have this conversation that's being aired in Gaza or the West Bank, people are going to, just tune it out instantly. I mean, the reality right now is we're in the middle of a horrific tragedy that's still unfolding every single day. I mean, we're not talking about, how are we going to solve it, particularly if we're thinking about it's going to take another couple of decades before you reach there. We are talking about something is going to be preempted. There is no, we're talking as if the main Israeli concern has to do with security. That is not true of the current day Israel. It's not true even of the Israeli public opinion. There's no question that October 7th has had a traumatic impact on Israelis, no doubt, and it has hardened them, no doubt. There's no question about it. As, of course, what happened in Gaza has hardened Palestinian positions, no doubt. But go before October 7, 2023. You've had a rise of the far right in Israel that clearly makes claims to all the territory between the river and the Mediterranean, not because of security reasons, but because they think God gave it to them. And they don't think the Palestinians belong there. They think the Palestinians, if they're going to, whoever remains there, should remain there and accept being a lower caste at the mercy of Israeli rules, not having political rights. That's the vision. And by the way, we think of the Israeli public, now the public opinion polls show the overwhelming majority of Israelis supporting ethnic cleansing. We're not talking about supporting ethnic cleansing. That cannot all be attributed to October 7th, because exactly 10 years ago, 2015 and 2016, Pew did a poll in Israel, and half of Israelis, 48% to be exact, supported expelling Palestinian citizens of Israel. Citizens of Israel. We're not talking about the West Bank and Gaza. We've had a hardening of positions across the board in Israel. And so I think and now who controls the power? So you are looking at an Israeli government in the foreseeable future that clearly has the aim, if it can, to ethnic cleanse the Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. You've had enormous tragedy and destruction in Gaza, and the need for billions of dollars to just even return to where you were, and it might take a decade or two to get there. And you have, on the West Bank, things are getting worse every single day. I mean, settler violence is expanding every day against vulnerable Palestinians. And so what you have is a situation, that's why I say it's like a parallel reality that we're discussing this. This is not on the table. And what makes it all worse in terms of the ability of a far-right Israeli government to implement its plan is that we, as the United States of America, have enabled it. We have not been able to stop it. So therefore, my focus has been not so much on what is the political outcome. We'll get there. That's important. And you could even use the term two-state solution. I don't care. What I can care about is to see concrete steps now, which says anything that goes against, anything that's inequitable, anything that's dominant, anything that is violates international law, we're not going to do it. We're not going to support you to do it. We're not going to enable you to do it. And if we don't do that, there is no chance. It doesn't matter what the path is. It doesn't matter what the vision is, whether it's one state or two states. So that's really what.
Okay, so I want Dennis to reply now, but when you do, if you could, I want to come to U.S. policy in a few minutes. I want to come soon to the question of these conditions. How do we create conditions that could get us there? You have a lot of explicit thinking about that. But whatever else you're going to say, I'd also like you to comment on whether the way Shibley has depicted Israeli consciousness and public opinion kind of matches up with what you have seen on your most recent trip there.
Yeah, no, I just spent 3.5 weeks there. I don't think it's that way. I think there is, the vast majority of Israelis do not look at the West Bank and think, this is God-given, this is, we have to have it. The vast majority, by the way, never go to the West Bank. So for them, security is a preoccupation. We have a government for whom what Shibley described is, the way he described it is completely accurate. That's who this government is.
The current
The
Netanyahu
current Israeli government, that's who they are. And even if Prime Minister Netanyahu himself may not be exactly that, he has allowed Ben-Gvir and Smotrich to do this.
Okay,
So-
we're talking about the Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and the Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich.
Who is also a minister of defense,
Wow.
who has created a whole different approach. The military had responsibility for approving settlement activity, out of their hands now, in his hands. They've developed what they call farms, something they never did before, as a way of taking what was private land, turning it into public land, and creating new realities on the ground. But that's why this election in Israel, I think, is really pivotal. You will have, if the opposition emerges, it's not that they're going to come and embrace a Palestinian state. They're not. But they're also not going to have this galloping de facto annexation. I mean, we're in an interesting place right now. I'm going to say two things, and it brings me back to the fact that, yes, I am, having been a longtime practitioner, by definition, I tend to focus on what I think is pragmatic approaches. Now, the first point I would say, you had Likud adopt a resolution of formal annexation of the West Bank. And the Arabs, meaning the Emiratis, the Saudis, and the Qataris, went to President Bush. And they said, in the case of the Emiratis said, look, if you want to see an expansion of the Abraham Accords, not only will you not see an expansion of the Abraham Accords, you may collapse the Abraham Accords if there's
You
formal
said
annexation.
President Bush. Did you mean President Trump?
I definitely meant President Trump.
Okay. Go ahead. This is the occupational hazard when you've worked for as many presidents as you have, Dennis. Go ahead.
Not only that, it may have been Freudian, but that's, but so they came to President Trump, and then he met with a delegation of Arabs in New York at the UN, and then he came out and he said there'll be no annexation. As I've been talking to many of them, I'm saying you need to focus on not just de facto, not just the de jure, you need to focus on de facto. So, number one, there is a role the Arabs can play because they do have a relationship with the president. You know, in the Middle East, it used to be a lot of the Arab countries said, look, if we want to affect the American administration, we need to go through Jerusalem. No longer the case. They go directly. So they have the ability to affect that, and they need to be doing that, number one. But number two, we're dealing with the Trump administration. I think if we use the term international law in the Trump administration, we would probably find it's kind of an oxymoron. So if we're trying to affect the behavior of the one the one leader who has the ability to influence at least the current Israeli government, it's Trump. So if we're going to go to him on the basis of international law, you're not going to get anywhere. If you're going to go to him and say, you know, you've said you brought peace for the first time in 3,000 years. Well, what's happening on the ground is going to destroy your peace. Now that creates a possibility. That point 19 I referred to, that didn't come from the Israelis. That came from the Arabs. And there is an understanding, which is an interesting change. There are Arab countries, they always paid lip service to the Palestinian cause. One of the things that has emerged is they now realize, especially the Gulf states, that you can't ignore it. That's different. And that's, again, it creates a potential lever. And I'm focused on what are the points of leverage that can be applied that will change the realities on the ground that I also find right now abhorrent, but I also find them as a fundamental threat to what I think is the long-term need. Eventually, we have to get to two states. It will be hard because of the psychology right now on both sides. But if we can change that reality, if we can begin to actually produce a transformation in Gaza, if we can stop the lawlessness in the West Bank, and if we stop the expansion of the settlements in the West Bank, at least outside the blocks, because that still allows you to have a Palestinian state, even if it may have to take somewhat of a different form, as I was saying, then we're taking what is a terrible, horrific situation, and we're moving it in a direction that gives me a reason to think we can get somewhere.
Okay, great. So you mention in what I guess is now the second edition of Statecraft, just out, you delineate a number of proximate or facilitating conditions that could begin to put us on a better pathway. Let's talk about those, and then let's talk about how we might realize those, both in terms of what an Israeli government could or would need to do, what the Palestinians could or would need to do, and what the U.S. would need to do. Okay, Shibley, he's mentioned two of the conditions one could imagine that would be facilitating on the Israeli side, which is halting the expansion of settlements and the kind of lawless, abusive, expropriating type of quality that some of these settlement activities and other settler activities have. What else do you want to specify that is needed to kind of get us to a place where we could start making progress?
Well, first of all, when Trump was elected, I was asked to write a report for us through the Brookings Institution, where I also have an affiliation, about sort of if you wanted to get a two-state solution, what would you want the Trump administration to do? And my write-up, I actually did a little write-up on it. I said I would immediately recognize a Palestinian state. And here's the logic of it, okay? So if you really, I don't think it's possible anytime soon, but here's the logic. That's why we wrote in this piece about, other states recognizing Palestine despite the fact that—
July 2025 Foreign Affairs piece.
Exactly. So the reality of it is that if you had Trump recognize a state, what it does, it signals, first of all, to the Israeli government, to the Israeli hardliners, no, you cannot expel Palestinians. No, there's no ethnic cleansing. No, these are not your territories. No, you cannot annex them. That's a huge message coming from the United States of America, because part of the problem is that people on the right have learned that you can have your cake and eat it too. And they have been enabled by various administrations who have, with a lot of rhetoric, but done nothing but essentially to back every step that has taken place by far-right Israeli governments that have preempted the possibility of emerging a Palestinian state. So you can do that. Obviously, that's not what this president is doing. He's not even precluding options alternative to the two-state solution. He has certainly not allowed Israel to annex the West Bank outwardly, but there is de facto annexation taking place every single day. He has not yet supported ethnic cleansing, but he's not precluded that. And part of the reason why there hasn't been more ethnic cleansing is that neighboring states and everybody else has not allowed more Palestinians to be deported through them, and particularly Egypt. One reason why there's tension between Egypt and Israel that has emerged. So all of these things, yes, those are all helpful, but short of a big international stance on principle that precludes all of these things that are being proposed by the far right in Israel, there is no chance that it could happen. And right now, honestly, those are even more important, I think, in the short to intermediate term than the actual reaching of a two-state, because they mean something on the ground that creates different possibilities.
Okay, so let's talk, and you've jumped ahead to U.S. policy, which is fine. Let's talk in a minute about what could potentially change pretty soon in terms of politics on the Israeli side, what might change, but without any date of our necessarily having in mind in terms of politics on the Palestinian side. But first, I want to ask Dennis, what conditions do you think need to be specified in terms of Palestinian rhetoric, posture, and behavior that would create a more feasible pathway to move us toward a two-state possibility?
Look, one of the interesting things is that one of the things we always failed to succeed in doing when we actually had a real process, we never succeeded in creating a kind of mutually reinforcing process where each side would acknowledge the positive steps of the other. Quite the contrary. And we're obviously in a situation now where it would be very difficult to do anything like that. But what I was saying before, there need to be parallel sets of obligations. Some of it has to be quite tangible, some of it can be rhetorical. On the Palestinian side, if we're trying to affect the Israeli view of Palestinians, a readiness on the part of Palestinians to say, look, we accept that there's a historic Jewish connection to the land, something they have not done, that would have an effect. You'd get noticed if that were the case, if that were official policy. That's why I say on the parallel to that is I would like to see the Israelis say, we recognize the Palestinians are a people and have a right to self-determination. We think there are responsibilities that go with that. But if you're going to try to begin to alter the perceptions that exist today, then you have to have each side do things that they haven't done before. And in a way that sends a message that says, okay, look, maybe something is changing. So yes, I would start, at least rhetorically, I would start with, on the Palestinian side, with saying we accept the historic Jewish connections to the land, because that signals we accept that the idea of a nation state of the Jewish people is legitimate, okay? I would also like to see, one of the things that is an issue, it took so long to condemn Hamas. It should not have taken so long to condemn Hamas. It was simply fundamentally wrong. And it took a long time. In the case of the Arabs, by the way, other than the UAE and Bahrain, nobody condemned it until the Saudis, in a joint statement with the French, a year and 3/4 later, came out and condemned it. So the message it sends to Israel, if Palestinians or Arabs can't condemn this, what does that tell us? So you need to see something like that. Now, it also does, one last word. There needs to be, on the Israeli side, when, it's not enough to say we're a state of laws, or, when you see the lawlessness and the answer is, well, this is just 70 kids. They're just misguided, this is not a larger movement. Well, that's not at all what's happening. I'll give one example and then I'll stop. I have very good friends, Israelis, who have gone to try to stop some of the marauding, and they are of my generation, which is to say they're not young, and they get physically manhandled. And when they go and they complain
By their fellow Israelis.
Yes, and when they go and they complain to the Israeli police, nothing is done. That's this government. That's Ben Gvir. And that has to change too. And Palestinians have to see that that's changing, that we're not going to allow that. And we're going to condemn it. And we're not going to try to explain it away and say it's just 70 kids.
Larry, let me just suggest you take about 5 or 6 more minutes. And then we'll
I
throw
was
it
just
open to
about to
questions.
say that in 5 minutes, we're going to go to your questions. There's a mic here, there's a mic there. If any of you want to, be sure to ask a question and want to start lining up, you should feel free to do so. Go ahead.
So, first of all, on the condemnation of Hamas, actually there were a lot of people who condemned Hamas, including Mahmoud Abbas, whom obviously, not exactly very strong and legitimate leader, he did that, and at a time when it was emotionally difficult to go against them. But think about again, we've got over 20,000 children killed by Israel. Gaza was obliterated. What did it take to get people to condemn the Israeli actions after so many tens of thousands of children killed, people killed, civilians killed? Whether it's not just in Israel, including in the West, including by our own government, including by President Biden. How long? That one reason why people started calling him Genocide Joe. I mean, let's be realistic in those emotional things. It's not just it certainly doesn't happen, but I think the issue of legitimacy is really more important. That Trump that certainly Dennis talked about, which is sort of recognizing the legitimacy of the Jewishness of Israel, and I think that I'm not sure what that really means, honestly, because I think that states are legitimate. Israel is legitimate. The legitimacy of Israel, the legitimacy of every state, derives from its recognition by the United Nations. I mean, that's what a legitimacy state is. Israel is legitimate because the UN admitted it, and entities that have not been admitted to the UN are not considered legitimate. There are some legitimacy that derives from less than statehood, like Palestine is a state but not accepted as a member state, and national movements. There are also international resolutions, like on refugees and other things that have to be respected, because the source of legitimacy of states in the international community emanates from their acceptance by the United Nations. That is it. Now, everyone is entitled to their own narrative of legitimacy, and I respect people's narrative of legitimacy. And we even accept what states call themselves. Now, it doesn't, regardless of the circumstances of their creation. I mean, in all honesty, many of the Arab states did not exist before the second half of the 20th century, and they were created by colonial powers. They were not necessarily reflective of the communities that pre-existed. We know that. Could be said about many states in the Arab world. But they're legitimate. They're equally legitimate today because they're members of the UN, and now they've acquired their own nationhood. Now, each one of them has a narrative about why they're legitimate. That's internal. I respect that. But you don't expect that to be the foundation of acceptance by everybody else. Everybody has their own narrative, and you don't expect it. That is not a requirement. Now, states can call themselves whatever they want. For example, Israel calls itself a Jewish state. Iran calls itself an Islamic state. Syria calls itself an Arab state, despite the fact that they all have minorities that are not Muslim, not Arab, not Jewish. That's not unusual. That's okay. What we should hold them accountable is by treating everyone equally, no matter what they call themselves. Even more, our aim as the United States of America is not, when we recognize the Islamic Republic of Iran, we're not saying we're embracing Islamic supremacy in Iran. We're saying this is what they call themselves, that's what the UN accepted, we accept them. The same thing to be said about the Arab Republic of Syria. We accept what they call themselves. We're going to hold them accountable for equality inside. And so with Israel, certainly that's what we've accepted. And by the way, when President Truman recognized Israel, the draft he was given recognizing the Jewish state of Israel, he crossed out Jewish as the state of Israel. He didn't want to even call it that. So I think this idea that you have to kind of recognize the Jewishness, or we advocate it even worse, because advocating an advantage for a particular ethnic group in any state, no matter what they're called, not calling a state equally for all its citizens, it's not something that we should do. So I don't really understand this idea. I think it's an idea that I understand the need for it. I understand how people emotionally get attached to it, but I don't think that that is something that is essential for legitimacy, because legitimacy derived Israel is legitimate, principally because it's accepted by the United Nations.
Can I make two quick points? I was raising this in the context of, if we're going to change perceptions, one of the things Israelis need to see is that there's an acknowledgement of the historic Jewish connection to the land. I use that formula quite deliberately. So if we're going to change perceptions on the Israeli side, you need something like that. On the Palestinian side, having Israel accept that the Palestinians are people who have a right to self-determination, I think that would have an effect. I'm thinking in terms of how do we change the psychic landscape on each side. That's why I make that point.
Two matters before we go to Q&A. First of all, let's do the poll again, if we can. So the first time around, before the conversation, it was, I think, 19 or 20 for within the next decade. It's moved down to 15. It was about 55 eventually, and that's moved down, or 55 within eventually, and that moved to 66, and it was 26 no, and it is 19 no now. So not a huge amount of movement, I would say. And now we'll take attendance. If you will put the attendance screen up and take your pictures. And then if, as Larry suggested, anybody with questions comes to the microphones and we'll take it, the left one and the right one and the left one and the right one. And since we don't have a whole lot of time, please keep the questions very short so that our two guests, or three if you want to ask Larry a question too, have time to answer.
Thank you. So I guess, as you mentioned, polls show that majority of Israeli society has very genocidal views, ethnic cleansing and all that. And so how can we allow Zionists to remain on Palestinian land, whether it be West Bank, Gaza, or the 48 territories, when they have been genocidal since 48? And how can we condemn and not allow Palestinians to have self-defense and resistance when they have faced genocide by Zionist militias? And how can we allow these Zionist militias like the IOF to continue when they've been ethnically cleansing and genociding Palestinians since 48? And how can we ensure right of return for Palestinian refugees?
Can I start? Well, I guess I just disagree with your premise. A majority of Israelis don't believe that you should go and exterminate Palestinians. That would be genocide. They don't believe in that. You're saying they do. And you were saying they've done it since 48. In 48, they were attacked. So, you know, I guess your premise is just one I don't accept.
I think that, you know, the Israelis, I mean, if you mean that the Israelis have supported what the rest of the world called genocide in Gaza, yes, a majority of Israelis have supported it. They have not complained about it. Why? You can argue a couple of things. One is they didn't consider it genocide. I think you can make that argument. A second argument is that ultimately when you looked at the Israeli debate in the early days, and I watch Israeli TV regularly, and I watch the media, read the media in Hebrew as well, they have rarely covered the civilian casualties. Really incredible, actually, how much blackout there was. It penetrated into few, the elites, and ultimately when it started coming in, a lot more people. But generally, they bought into the narrative that we're destroying Hamas, that everybody, that is what's going on, is destroying Hamas. By the way, I had taken a position in the Biden administration. I wrote something and I went and talked to the Secretary of State and others during the Biden administration to say this theoretical aim of destroying Hamas is a recipe for genocide. I didn't use the term genocide, but a recipe for destroying all of Gaza, including its civilians, because it's non-doable and it's going to be an excuse for doing that. But that's what the Israeli public. But on ethnic cleansing, there's no question that polls show that a vast majority of Israelis support ethnic cleansing. So on that side, you're right. I don't think anyone should be leaving Israel-Palestine, whether it's Jews or Arabs. I think they belong there, they're there, they need to find a way to coexist. I don't think it's about deporting people from the greater Israel-Palestine area. No one, neither Palestinians nor Jews, should be deported. I think what we need to find is a way for them to coexist equitably, not one dominating the other, and that's where our focus should be.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you both so much for the conversation. My question is, I was wondering what you both thought ought to be the role of dialogue, peaceful activism, and violent activism, respectively, in bringing about a feasible future for Palestinians and Israelis.
Either way.
Okay. It's not going to surprise you that I think that peaceful dialogue is the way you transform a situation. The problem with violence is violence almost always begets violence. Violence always serves the extreme. The extremes on both sides use the other. When you feel insecure, you're not going to make peace. When you feel insecure, you're not going to take risks for peace. So creating a peaceful dialogue is, I think, the key to being able to transform things. Now, it's hard, given the current context, for sure. But I'll tell you, I work with an Israeli and a Palestinian NGO. I deal with them all the time. We focus on ways that the two of them can be working together, and we're thinking about ways to give much greater visibility and exposure to that, to show here are Israelis and here are Palestinians, and they can cooperate, and both can be better off because of it. So, you have to build this right now, step by step. But if you basically say the only alternative is violence, I can guarantee that the response will be violence.
I would focus on two parts of this, because one part I assume that you had about international activism, like your activism or anybody else's activism, student activism, other parties' dialogue and activism among Israelis and Palestinians, which is what Dennis addressed. That part, I have to say, I have certainly been involved throughout my career in bringing people together, people to people, dialogue, even when it wasn't popular, often behind the scenes. People didn't even know about these. And they were fruitful at various places. But over time, a lot of people gave up because they thought that they were being kind of pacified from their activism, while the reality on the ground is so uneven and so favoring one or the other, particularly on the Palestinian side. They didn't even want to get involved anymore because of this reality. On the international side, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, what happened whenever, all the atrocities we've seen globally, from the Holocaust in the 20th century to genocide in Rwanda or elsewhere, the emergence of human rights organizations, the emergence of international law, the activism of people in the West and elsewhere is all part of the mobilization to bring in justice, to bring in people in the international law. I mean, when people were upset with protest on campuses, if you took polls and you found that a majority of young people thought what's happening in Gaza is genocide, if you thought it was genocide and you didn't protest, I mean, the idea that you'd be angry with people, you could say, okay, it's not genocide. You can argue with that, okay? That's an argument that could be had. But if you believe what's happening is genocide, if you believe what's happening is so deeply unjust, and you sit there, what if it was happening to you? Would you want to see people? And I could tell you that the victims, it doesn't matter whether they're Jewish or Arab or anything else, when there is empathy globally, it is God sent to them. It is the only thing that presents hope. It is, when you had Biden go to the Israelis after October 7th and stand with them, you could see how Israelis were extremely thrilled by the idea of getting just the empathy and the support. So imagine what it would be like on the other side. He didn't, for example, do the same thing on the other side. So no, activism, peaceful activism, is absolutely essential, I think, for moving the needle.
I want to just add something. Look, I've known Larry since I was in college. And when did I meet he and his sister? When we were protesting the Vietnam War. The idea of peaceful activism is absolutely correct. It's when it turns violent that it's not. When I come to a lot of campuses and I want to promote, for example, a Jewish-Muslim dialogue, and there are those who say, no, I won't deal with them. It's like they want to take the conflict from the region and bring it to the campus. I've spent 40 years trying to end this conflict. The way to end the conflict is not by saying, I'll never talk to them. So, for me, dialogue matters. And I take Shibley's point. If the dialogue looks like it's completely disconnected and has no possibility of effect, it's one thing. But one of the virtues of dialogue on campus is to expose each side to the other's views. Why do they hold them? As a negotiator and a mediator, I would always try to ask, okay, why is this so important to you? You learn when you're listening. So, for me, it's a mistake not to have dialogue.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for your time here. Diplomacy is one thing, religion is another. Central to Jewish identity is the notion of a promised land dating back to the book of Exodus. And the Jewish notion of a promised land includes much of the area of the West Bank. According to Judaism, the only place where Jews are allowed to make sacrifices is on the Temple Mount, which is currently occupied by Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. And on the Muslim side, multiple jihadi groups like Hamas, Iran, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah, and Al-Qaeda talk about and advocate for the extermination of the Jewish people and any Israeli state. And many in the Near East, the Middle East, continue to oppose the notion of there being any Israeli state at all. So in light of the undeniable role of religion in this conflict, do you still believe that a two-state solution is still viable, and perhaps international control of Jerusalem or a solution to the holy area?
Let me start this one because, when the Oslo agreements were reached in 1993, and I supported them, I even worked behind the scenes to help bring that about, even though I thought it was lousy deal in terms of the actual content of it. But one reason why I supported it, it was based on the idea of a nationalist resolution, that is, Palestinian nationalism, Israeli Jewish nationalism, compromise on territory, and keeping religion out of it. I always worried, and I wrote, and Dennis knows, I wrote a lot in the 1990s about my fear that religious nationalism was going to overtake secular nationalism if, in fact, we didn't achieve two states. And when we get to the religious nationalism, it's going to be zero-sum game. It's going to be hard to compromise. The reality of it is states in the modern era have nothing to do with, they're about sovereignty. Sovereignty is a new concept. It has nothing to do with how people were distributed globally. It's about sovereignty of states. It's a modern idea that should be divorced from the concept of history as such, but every side is entitled to their narrative. And the problem is once they base their state and the notion of the state on that narrative, then it does result in a zero-sum game. And I'm afraid that what has happened certainly inside Israel, with the rise of religious Zionism that has taken hold in a big way, is this idea that does preclude the notion of a two-state solution.
Yeah, first I completely agree, and you did write about it, and we always tried to get away from the idea of the religious basis of the conflict because we understood if no one can compromise on their faith. So you turn it into zero sum because now you have, by definition, you have a principle that you can't even adjust. The essence of compromise is mutual adjustment. If this is a religiously based conflict, then you make it almost impossible to work out a compromise. So that, it has to be more national, although I will say, I think on both sides, one of our failings as negotiators, we didn't have enough discussion with those who were not extreme in terms of their religious. I'll put it differently. There were clerics on each side who could embrace the idea of peace, and we should have drawn them in more because they would have created more of a legitimate context for those who were negotiating from a national standpoint. We didn't do enough of that. And in a sense, because we didn't do enough of that, we left the space open to the more extreme. And I think that was, in retrospect, it's one of the mistakes I think we made.
So there are 4 people up at the microphones and just a few minutes left. Let me suggest that we take 2 questions at a time. So you, and then we'll take the other 2.
Good suggestion.
Okay. This is mainly for Mr. Ross, but I'd love both of your thoughts on this question. So, Mr. Ross, I wanted to clarify your position on the difficulty of attaining a one-state solution. A common argument against a one-state solution is that the past century plus of conflict between Israelis and Palestinians will make coexistence in a single state impossible, not just politically, but socially. But it was interesting to hear you broaden that theory to other states in the Middle East, saying that, in essence, any state where one identity, one nationality is not central inevitably leads to conflict, abstracting the issue from the Israel-Palestine conflict to a more general logic about pluralism. My question is, do you feel the same way about this country, which within the next 2 decades will become majority-minority? If not, and I presume not, then how should Americans and citizens of other multi-ethnic and multicultural states think about what distinguishes their countries from the countries in the Middle East you referenced?
Right. Hold that, and we'll get the question.
I'll hold it.
Too.
Yeah, so whether we're talking about minimizing the violence in Gaza or the feasibility of a two-state solution, I was wondering if you see the influence of Israel on domestic politics as a significant barrier to these objectives. So this can be more formal, like pacts, like AIPAC, or laws like anti-BDS, or equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Do you see those as significant barriers to peace?
2 radically different questions, which...
Okay, good. All right. Division of labor? Okay. Something's fundamentally different in terms of the issue you raised. The U.S. has always been a melting pot, by definition. It's how we defined ourselves. In the Middle East, that's not how they define themselves. So to say that because in the region where you've had, as I said, sectarian, national, clannish differences, and to think that it's easy for those to coexist in a single state, there isn't a tradition of it. Here, there is a tradition. Maybe it's being questioned now, but there is a tradition of it. I mean, what is our motto? From many one. That's e pluribus unum. That's the American motto and ethos. That's not an ethos that has existed in the Middle East.
Take 20 seconds to recommend a work to you by one of the great scholars of ethnic conflict and identity conflict called Donald Horowitz. It's called Ethnic Groups in Conflict. And he distinguishes between centralized conflicts in which 2 identity groups are competing against one another, particularly when they're relatively equal in size or something like that, and the kind of pluralism you talk about with many identity groups, it's much easier to manage many identity groups, bring them together into some kind of pluralism, particularly when it's emerged organically the way it has in the US, at least in recent decades, than to have just two groups each struggling for, supremacy.
And so the question that you asked about the role of Israel in America, well, obviously the U.S. has interest groups, and that's legitimate. There are internal legitimate groups, whether they're pro-Israel, pro-Arab, pro-anything, that's perfectly legitimate. The question is what the Israeli government does and how it collaborates with some group to advance its interests. I think what has happened in the present moment is that because this Israeli government is a supremacist, expansionist government with an agenda that is not going to be accepted regionally, that is not going to lead to an equilibrium, and they've just gone through a very devastating, yes, it was much more devastating to Palestinians, but the Israelis themselves were traumatized. They see themselves in an existential war, and they see that something is not going to end. And they discovered that they're more dependent on the United States than they even thought. They always knew that the United States was essential, but in this war, it was even essential for contact against Hamas, a relatively small group next door, that they needed replenishment of forces. They needed to defend against missiles. They needed to. The U.S. invested something like $30 billion in defending Israel during this war, in addition to the amounts that go to Israel regularly, deployed missile defense systems, naval forces, that the Israelis see themselves as not being able to achieve the agenda they want to achieve, which, as I said, something that would not be accepted regionally without American support at a time when what we see happening in this country is an erosion of support for Israel for the first time. Not only among Democrats, which as some of you may know, I've been conducting public opinion polls in the US on this issue literally for decades. And I have never seen the kind of significant shift that has taken place, particularly among Democrats, most of whom now see Israel essentially as a genocidal villain, certainly young people, and that this is also happening on the right, where you suddenly have young people on the right, Republicans, even evangelicals, increasingly angry with Israel, increasingly angry with American support for Israel. And so there is a sense in Israel that there is this thing in the US that's happening that is eroding what they see as an existential thread, the relationship with the US. Therefore, the Israeli government thinks that the fight for American public support for Israel is an existential fight. And therefore, they're willing to go to great extremes to fight the fight in America to retain and advance public support for Israel. And that obviously creates need for coalitions and threads and relationships. And yes, I see that not only already in progress, in what we have seen take place in the media, but I see it also in what might come ahead, because I don't think this episode is anywhere near an equilibrium point, and I see this intensifying in America.
So I realize we're over time, but I want to take advantage while we have these two incredibly knowledgeable guests here. So very quick questions from the two of you.
Hello, and thank you all for spending time to speak to us. So it seems like this conversation is oscillating around two interacting concepts, that being inevitabilities and possibilities, namely what's inevitably stagnant and what's possibly changeable. Based on your all statements, it seems as if we have come to this consensus that Israel's violence against the Palestinian peoples is inevitable, and also that the violence of the Palestinian people in resistance against the Israeli regime is also inevitable. I'd argue that that is something that they have every right to do and every right to enact, but that is a different conversation. I'm more focusing on what we consider as possible, right? And you have categorized that a two-state, or you categorized that a two-state solution is possible, and that we have all the resources in the world to funnel into that project. I guess my question then becomes, how do we have all the resources in the world to funnel our efforts into a two-state solution, but we don't have those same resources to be able to enact a one-state solution that uplifts a people that is clearly the victims of this conflict?
And you.
Yes, thank you so much for coming here. There was recently a quote from Netanyahu that Israel should become more like Sparta, like completely self-sufficient, autonomous, self-reliant. And even though he kind of walked those statements back, I was just wondering, we see, like you said, these really great shifts in American perspectives on Israel that we really haven't seen before, of an increasingly anti-Israeli sentiment among both left and right. So I'm just wondering if you think that this will result in Israel sort of reading this and adjusting, become more self-sufficient, and then soon, near future, become kind of unreachable by the U.S. And if that window of opportunity that the U.S. has to reach and have almost leverage over Israeli policy is shrinking. Thank you.
I'll start. Let me pick up with what you've asked. Israel has always had this kind of ethos that we don't ask anybody else to fight our battles. And the DNA was we defend ourselves by ourselves. Turns out, in a world where missiles and drones become much more dominant, that the ability to defend itself by itself is really not what it used to be. Now, what that means, among other things, is Israel can't exist as an island, and Israel needs to take account of others. When I was in Israel, I've said this several times when I was there, there's like two different realities. For Israelis, the overhang of October 7th is really powerful. So when they look at Gaza, they see hostages who were, to say they were abused is a gross understatement. And they see soldiers who were killed. They don't see what the rest of the world sees. Shibley made a reference to this. They don't see the death and destruction in Gaza. In Israeli press, we're almost, it's like, to say it's a free press would be an understatement, but there was almost a kind of collective decision not to show what was going on in Gaza. Like, the trauma within Israel was too great.
There was also censorship.
There was, but there was a kind of self-censorship. And I think it was a function of, just we've suffered this trauma, and it's an inability to show that the other side might be suffering a trauma. Meantime, the rest of the world, including here, sees much more the death and destruction in Gaza, and younger people have come to equate that death and destruction with Israel. So Israel has an issue now that it has to address. It has to address, and not from the standpoint of, we have to, this is what's known as Hasbara, where you sell Israel. Not from that standpoint. From the standpoint of saying, what Israel? What is Israel's brand? Who are they? I think this election in Israel, by the way, is very much about that. I think, you had Israelis demonstrating. We had no King's Day here, and we drew 7 million people. They had, on a weekly basis, demonstrations against the effort to transform their judiciary, where 3 to 4% of the entire population was out there every week. We can have all sorts of problems with this government, and it's clear I do. But I also see there's a grassroots democracy there that is designed and is driven by the need to change, to have an election that will create accountability. So that accountability, a different government is going to have to address the position that Israel is in. It can definitely explain, here's the nature of the threats we see. You know, Shibley said earlier, legitimacy comes by being a UN state. Well, we had states, you have Iran and others in the region for a long time who've said Israel shouldn't exist, denying its right to be there. Israelis lived in a neighborhood where that was a fact. They didn't make it up, it was a fact. So that definitely colors the way they see the security. And I'll just say, look, Israel was phenomenally successful militarily in terms of weakening Hamas, weakening Hezbollah, weakening Iran. But it didn't none of those areas of great military success, changing the regional balance of power in a way that really has changed the landscape. I was going to start by saying today, I've spent the whole last week only focused on Iran, so this was kind of a relief. But the reality is what's going on in Iran is not disconnected from the weakening of Iran, the weakening of its regional proxy network. But Israel has not had a strategy to take what was military gains and turn it into political outcomes. That has to happen. I suspect if we see a change in Israeli government, it will address the issues you were raising on the one hand, but it will also address the fact that Israel is going to have to come up with political strategies that are much more likely to produce outcomes that ultimately benefit Israel.
Shibley, why don't you have the last word?
If without justice for Palestinians, Israel could never be self-sufficient. And the reason for it is that its security is going to be defined by a need for hegemony. And hegemony in the region is impossible without a superpower support. You're talking about a state with minimal resources of 10 million people, of whom 7.5 million are Jewish. You're talking about a region of over 500 million people. It is impossible to have self-sufficiency if you're going to advocate an expansionist vision that is not going to be accepted by the region. It's just not possible. They could talk about it, but it's a joke. It's not going to happen. It never could happen. With regard to the possibility, I think that we shouldn't really be talking about the possible. The possible, everything is possible in some ways. We should be talking about what's probable. If you ask me today, what's more probable, ethnic cleansing or two states? I would say ethnic cleansing. If you ask me today, what's more probable, an indefinite apartheid single state or two-state solution? I would say an indefinite apartheid state. That is scary thought. That's why I said this whole idea about let's choose between one state and two states is like in a parallel universe. We need to talk about the probable reality in any short term, the existing reality today, and address that in a just and fair and equitable way. And we, particularly the United States of America, I'm not talking to Israelis and Palestinians, they could do what they want, but we as the United States of America must start with that, not accepting the injustice, not accepting the inequality, not accepting that which goes against core values, not accepting that which is profoundly illegal in international terms.
And I would just say, when I look at what's an unacceptable outcome, it inspires me to do everything I can to produce what can be a more acceptable outcome.
So with that, let me first of all thank Larry. Deborah and I were very wise to choose somebody as wise and knowledgeable as Larry to moderate this conversation. And thank both of you, not just for your knowledge, but also for modeling just the kind of conversation that we hope this course will do. So many thanks to all three of you.